The stratification line was wrong. It was a small thing, the kind of detail 99 people out of 100 would walk past without a second glance, but I wasn't paid to walk past things. I was paid to read the earth, to understand what lay beneath the surface before anyone stuck a drill or a foundation into it. I wiped the condensation from the lens of my transit level, blinking against the biting chill of the Colorado wind. The sheer granite face of the ridge reflected the gray October sky, but my focus was lower, near the creek bed that separated my property from the vacant scrubland to the east. According to the county maps and the survey I'd conducted 3 years ago when I bought this land, the sandstone layer should have dipped 10 degrees south, but the core sample I just pulled, resting heavy and cold in my gloved hand, showed a 15-degree shear. The earth didn't lie. That meant the maps did, or someone had moved the markers. I lowered the sample into the crate, the clink of stone on plastic sharp in the silence. It was quiet up here, a silence so deep it felt like pressure in my ears. Since Sarah died, I'd come to rely on that silence. It was predictable. It didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. It didn't look at me with pity. It just existed, layer upon layer of compressed time, indifferent to the man standing on top of it. "Daddy?" The voice broke the vacuum. I turned, the tension in my shoulders dropping instantly. Maya was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, her legs swinging, wrapped in a pink puffer jacket that made her look like a frantic marshmallow. "Yeah, Bug?" I asked, walking over. I checked the time on my watch. 4:15 p.m. The temperature was dropping. We had 20 minutes of light left, tops. "Are the rocks talking to you again?" she asked, her breath puffing out in a white cloud. "Rocks don't talk, Maya. They just leave notes," I said, a line I'd used 1,000 times. I started packing the equipment, my movements efficient, practiced. Tripod collapsed, level boxed, GPS data saved. And right now, this note says we need to go check the east marker again. Something's off. Is it the bad neighbor? "We don't have neighbors," I corrected her, hoisting the crate into the truck bed. "We have an empty lot next door." "Not anymore," she said, pointing a mitten down the slope. I followed her line of sight. A black luxury SUV was winding its way up the neglected access road, struggling for traction on the loose gravel and ice. It was a city car, low to the ground, pristine. It had no business being up here on the ridge, miles from the paved highway. I felt that familiar tighten in my gut, the defensive instinct that had ruled my life for the last 4 years. This was our sanctuary. Strangers usually meant trouble. Developers, inspectors, or lost tourists. "Get in the truck, Maya," I said quietly. "Is it trouble?" "No," I lied, watching the SUV fishtail slightly before correcting. "It's just logistics." I waited by the rear fender, arms crossed, feeling the weight of the rock hammer on my belt. The SUV crested the hill and came to a stop 10 yards away. The engine cut, the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wasn't dressed for the foothills. That was my first observation. She was wearing a tailored wool coat that probably cost more than my suspension system, and leather boots with a heel that would snap on the first hidden root. She looked freezing. She also looked furious. She slammed the door, marched toward me, and stopped just outside of personal space. She was older than me, maybe late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that was slowly unraveling in the wind. Her eyes were dark, sharp, and currently focused on the survey stake near my boot. "You must be Foster," she said. No hello, no introduction. "I am," I said, keeping my voice level. "And you are trespassing on a private survey site." "I'm not trespassing," she snapped, pulling a folded document from her coat pocket. The wind tried to snatch it, but she held on with a white-knuckled grip. "I'm Hattie Ramirez, and according to this deed, you're currently parking your truck on my family's land." I looked at her, then down at the ground, then back at her. I didn't laugh, though the absurdity tempted me. I just let the silence stretch, watching her composure flicker. She was shivering, but she refused to hug herself for warmth. She stood tall, projecting a fragility wrapped in steel. "Ms. Ramirez," I said, my voice dropping to that dry, professional timbre I used in boardrooms before I quit that life. "I mapped this ridge myself. I know the stratigraphy of this dirt better than I know my own social security number. The property line is 20 feet that way, past the creek." "The creek moved," she said, her chin lifting. "My brother's legal team says the boundary follows the water flow. The water moved west." So the line moved west. That's not how geology works, I said. And it's definitely not how property law works in Colorado. Look, she exhaled, the fight draining out of her for a split second. I don't have time for a lecture. My family sent me here to liquidate this asset. I have a buyer lined up, and I have a deadline of December 25th. A deadline, I repeated. It's not just a deadline, Foster, she said, her voice turning brittle. If I don't close this sale by Christmas, my father cuts me out of the company entirely. No severance, no equity, no position. I am erased. I paused. That was the anchor, the clarity of the threat. She wasn't just doing a job, she was fighting for her survival. Total erasure, I said. Exactly, she replied, shivering violently now. So I need you to move your markers. Today, I looked at the SUV, then at the darkening sky, and finally at the woman shivering in front of me. She was terrified, not of me, but of failing. It won't be resolved today, I said, turning back to my truck. The light is gone, and your tires are about to lose pressure because the temperature is dropping below freezing in 10 minutes. If you try to drive down that access road in the dark in those heels and that car, you'll slide into the ravine. I can handle myself, she said, though her teeth chattered on the last syllable. I'm sure you can, I said, opening the driver's door. But geology doesn't care about your deadline. Come back tomorrow with appropriate footwear and a map that wasn't drawn by a lawyer. Then we'll talk. I climbed in, started the engine, and glanced at her in the side mirror as I pulled away. She stood there, a dark figure against the gray stone, watching me leave. She didn't move. She didn't retreat to her car. She just stood there, enduring the cold, as if she deserved it. The image stuck with me all the way down the drive to the cabin. It bothered me. It was a variable I hadn't accounted for. The cabin was warm, the wood stove popping with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. It was a simple structure, A-frame, heavy timber, built to withstand the weight of the snow and the solitude. I had spent the last 3 years renovating it, stripping away the rot and reinforcing the bones. It was unfinished in places, but it was solid. Maya was asleep on the rug, a coloring book splayed open next to her. I sat at the kitchen island, a topographical map spread out under the pendant light. My hand hovered over the contour lines of the ridge. Hadi Ramirez. The name triggered a faint memory from the business section of the paper a few months back. Ramirez Development Group. A failed merger. A public ousting. She wasn't just sent here to sell a plot of land. She was exiled. I traced the line of the creek. The quiet rival in me, the part that treated every problem as a competition against entropy, woke up. If the Ramirez family was claiming the creek shift changed the boundary, they were trying to steal access to the aquifer that ran beneath my northern quadrant. It wasn't about the land, it was about the water rights. They thought they were dealing with a local yokel living in the woods. They didn't know they were dealing with a man who used to find oil deposits for multinational conglomerates before his life imploded. I picked up my pen and made a note on the map. Check historical flow data. 1998 USGS survey. A knock at the door shattered the quiet. It was a hesitant sound, barely audible over the wind. I froze. No one came here at night. I walked to the door, flipping the porch light on. I opened it to find Hati Ramirez standing there. Her hair was wet with snow, her face pale, her expensive coat soaked through. She was holding her phone like a lifeline. "My car," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard the words barely formed. It wouldn't start. The battery. She looked past me, into the warmth of the cabin, but she didn't ask to come in. She just stood there, waiting for permission or rejection. "Come in," I said, stepping aside immediately. "Before you freeze to death." She stepped over the threshold, bringing the smell of ozone and pine with her. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking violently. This wasn't just cold. This was hypothermia creeping in. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her teeth clicking. "I didn't. I tried to call a tow truck, but there's no signal." "There's never signal in the valley," I said. I didn't offer comfort words. I offered solutions. "Sit by the fire. Remove the wet coat. I'll get you a blanket." I moved efficiently, grabbing a heavy wool throw from the sofa and a mug from the cupboard. I didn't ask if she wanted tea. I just put the kettle on. I watched her from the kitchen as she awkwardly unbuttoned her coat, her fingers stiff and clumsy. She sat on the edge of the hearth, as close to the fire as she dared, staring into the flames. She looked small, The corporate shark I'd met on the ridge was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she'd been treading water for so long she'd forgotten what dry land felt like. "I can drive you into town once the storm passes," I said, placing the mug of tea on the small table beside her. "But the road is iced over now. You're stuck here until morning." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and dark. "I can't stay here. I have to." She trailed off, looking at Maya sleeping on the rug. Her expression softened, a crack in the veneer. "You have a daughter." "I do. And she wakes up at 6, so don't get too comfortable." It was a rough attempt at humor, dry and clipped. Hattie managed a weak, fleeting smile. "Thank you for opening the door. It's a safety issue," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. "I couldn't leave a trespasser to freeze on my property. Imagine the paperwork." She took the mug, her hands shaking as she lifted it. "You really hate that I'm here, don't you?" "I don't hate you, Miss Ramirez. I don't know you, but I know what your family is trying to do with that boundary line. And I'm telling you now, the geology doesn't support their claim." She took a sip of the tea, closing her eyes as the heat hit her system. "My brother, Elias, he says the surveyor he hired found proof. He says you're squatting on 5 acres of prime development land." "Elias is lying," I said simply. "Or he's incompetent. I haven't decided which yet." She looked at me over the rim of the mug. "You sound very sure of yourself." "I am. I'm a geologist, Ms. Ramirez. I deal in rocks. They have a very strict policy about the truth." She lowered the mug. "Hattie, please. If I'm going to sleep on your floor, you can call me Hattie." "Reese," I said. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane. Inside, the fire popped. For the first time in years, the silence of the cabin felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was charged with a new variable. "Why is this land so important to you, Hattie?" I asked, watching her. She looked into the fire, her face illuminated by the dancing orange light. "Because it's my last chance. If I lose this, I lose everything my grandfather built. Elias will turn the company into a strip mining operation for quick cash." I nodded. I understood legacy. I understood trying to hold on to something solid while the world eroded around you. "Get some sleep," I said, pushing off the counter. "We'll look at the markers in the morning." "And Hattie?" She looked up. "If your brother is lying," I said, my voice low and steady, "I'm going to prove it, and you're going to have to decide whose side you're on, the truth or the family." She didn't answer. She just pulled the blanket tighter. The next 2 weeks were a study in friction. Hattie didn't leave. Her car was fixed a dead alternator, which I replaced myself in the driveway while she watched, handing me wrenches with a look of bewildered fascination. But the punishment required her to be on site to oversee the new survey her brother had ordered. She rented a room at the motel in town, but she spent every day on the ridge, pacing the property line, buried in paperwork. I watched her from a distance at first. She was tenacious, I'll give her that. She didn't complain about the mud or the cold. She bought a pair of practical boots. She started carrying a notebook, but she was fighting a losing battle, and she knew it. It was a Tuesday when the impact happened. I was in my workshop, cleaning a set of core barrels, when Hattie stormed in. She looked frantic. "They're here," she said, breathless. "The county inspectors," Elias called them. "They're claiming your septic field encroaches on the setback line. They want to shut down your occupancy permit." I set the barrel down slowly. This was Slot B, the antagonist leverage. Elias wasn't just fighting for the land, he was trying to bleed me out. "Show me," I said. She led me up the ridge. 2 men in high-vis vests were standing near the creek, pointing at a patch of damp earth. Elias wasn't there, but his presence hung over the scene like a bad smell. "Mr. Foster," one of the inspectors said, holding a clipboard. "We've had a report of unpermitted discharge." I walked past him, ignoring the clipboard. I went straight to the damp patch they were looking at. I crouched down, pulled a pH strip from my vest pocket, always prepared, and pressed it into the mud. "What are you doing?" the inspector asked. "Science," I muttered. I waited 10 seconds, then held up the strip. It hadn't changed color. "This isn't septic discharge, it's snowmelt runoff. You can tell by the lack of nitrates and the fact that it doesn't carry the ammonia signature of waste." I stood up, wiping my hands. "Furthermore, my septic field is located on the north slope, 50 yards that way, drilled into the bedrock with a containment liner that exceeds county code by a factor of 3. I installed it myself. I have the schematics, the inspection sign-off from 2021, and the time-stamped photos of the installation in my office. The inspector blinked. "Well, we still need to run a formal test." "Run it," I said, stepping closer, using my height and my calm to dominate the space. "But if you delay my occupancy permit based on a frivolous report from a developer who hasn't even stepped foot on this mountain, I will file a formal complaint with the State Board for harassment and misuse of public resources, and I will attach this pH test to the filing." The inspector looked at Hati, then back at me. He capped his pen. "We'll review the file." They walked away. I turned to Hati. She was staring at me, her eyes wide. It wasn't fear this time. It was respect. "You handled that," she said quietly. "I don't like bullies," I said, checking the pH strip one last time before tossing it in my trash pocket. "And I don't like people who don't do their homework." She stepped closer, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. "Elias won't stop Reese. He needs this land to leverage a loan for a massive project in Denver. He doesn't care about the runoff. He wants you gone." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You're supposed to be working for him." "I know," she said, looking down at her boots, the practical ones. "But he's wrong. And you're not what he said you were." "What did he say I was?" "A squatter. A obstacle." She looked up, her gaze steady. "You're a good father, and you're a hell of a geologist." It was a micro-observation she'd noticed. "Come inside," I said, the tension in my chest loosening just a fraction. "I have the 1,998 maps. I think I found where your brother's surveyor made the mistake." We spent the afternoon at my kitchen table. It was strictly professional, yet intimate in a way I hadn't expected. The domestic anchor, the coffee pot gurgling in the corner, the smell of old paper grounded us. I laid out the transparency sheets. "Look here. The creek bed in 1998 was here. The 2010 flood shifted the sediment layer west. Your brother's surveyor is using the current visual water line as the boundary, but the deed references the historical bedrock channel. That's 20 feet east, buried under the mud." I pointed with a pencil. Her shoulder brushed mine. I didn't pull away immediately. It was a protective proximity. We were two soldiers looking at a battle map. "So the land is yours," she said, her voice soft. "The land is mine," I confirmed. "And if he tries to build on that sediment layer, the foundation will crack within 5 years. The soil liquefaction potential is off the charts." She looked at the map, then at me. "If I present this to the board, if I show them the land is unstable, the deal dies. My father loses the contract. I lose my position. You lose a position that makes you miserable," I countered. "It's all I have, Reese. It's who I am." "No," I said, looking at her, really looking at her. "It's what you do. It's not who you are. Who you are is the woman who hiked up a mountain in freezing rain because she refused to give up. That's grit. You can't buy that." She held my gaze. For a second, the air between us felt heavy, not with pressure, but with possibility. I stared at the contour lines, but the numbers blurred. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about fault lines or aquifer depths. I was thinking about the way the light hit her hair when she argued about property law. "I need to pick up Maya from school," I said, clearing my throat and standing up. "Can I come?" she asked. The question surprised us both. "It's a preschool, Hati, not a board meeting." "I know," she said, standing up. I don't want to go back to the empty motel room yet, and I owe Maya a hot chocolate for waking her up that night." I hesitated, then nodded. "Get your coat." The weeks bled into December. Hattie became a fixture in our lives, a slow accumulation of presents like snow on a branch. She stopped wearing the suits. She started wearing jeans and flannel. She learned how to chop kindling badly at first, then with a determined proficiency that made me smile when she wasn't looking. We fell into a rhythm. The awakening dynamic was taking hold. I was saving her from the physical threats, the cold, the car troubles, the legal attacks from her brother, but she was saving me from the void. She made the cabin feel less like a bunker and more like a home. She brought color into our gray world. She listened to Maya's rambling stories about dragons with a seriousness that melted my heart. But the threat was escalating. Slati, the midpoint twist. I came home one evening to find Hattie sitting on my porch steps, her head in her hands. She was holding a large manila envelope. "What happened?" I asked, dropping my gear bag. She looked up, her eyes red. "I found it. In the archives. The original geological survey from 20 years ago. She handed me the envelope. I pulled out the yellowed documents. I scanned the data. My blood ran cold. This report. I tapped the paper. It says the Ramirez Group knew about the instability in 2005. They buried it. My father signed off on it, she whispered. He knew the land was worthless for development. He sent me here to sell it to an unsuspecting buyer so the liability would transfer off our books. He set me up, Reese. If the building collapses later, my signature would be on the sale deed. I'd be the one going to prison for fraud. I stared at the paper. It wasn't just punishment, it was a sacrifice. They were feeding her to the wolves to save the stock price. A cold, hard fury settled in my chest. It was the same feeling I had when I looked at an unstable cliff face, the knowledge that something was about to break, and I needed to control the fall. They're not going to get away with this, I said. How can we stop them? She asked, standing up. They have lawyers, Reese. They have money. We have a map and a truck. We have the truth, I said, and we have a hearing next week. The town hall meeting, she realized, to approve the zoning change. Exactly. Elias needs that zoning change to close the sale. We're going to walk into that meeting, and we're going to drop a geological bomb on his little parade. She looked at me, fear warring with hope. Why are you doing this? You could just defend your boundary and let them sell the rest. Why fight for me? I looked at her. The snow was falling softly around us. I wanted to tell her that she was the only variable that made the equation make sense. I wanted to tell her that I'd kept a seat open for her at the dinner table every night in my head. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key. It was a spare to the cabin. I'd made it 3 days ago. Because you're not just a neighbor anymore, Hattie, I said, pressing the key into her hand. It was a practical symbol, cool metal against warm skin, and I don't leave my team behind. She looked at the key, then at me, her fingers closed around it. She didn't say anything, but she stepped closer, resting her forehead against my chest for just a second. It was a fleeting contact, light as a breath, but it anchored me. Okay, she whispered. Let's burn it down. The relief was short-lived. Beat 7, the second obstacle. 2 days before the hearing, Elias showed up at the cabin. He didn't come alone. He brought a process server. I was in the driveway, loading the truck. Harry was inside with Maya, baking something that smelled like cinnamon and burnt sugar. Mr. Foster, Elias said, slick and smiling. He looked like Hattie, but without the soul. We have a proposition. He held out a check. I didn't take it. I could see the zeros from where I stood. It was enough to pay off my mortgage and fund Maya's college twice over. This is a settlement, Elias said. You agree the boundary is where we say it is. You drop the objection at the hearing, and you take this. And the instability? I asked. The landslide risk? Engineered solutions. Elias waved a hand. We'll pour more concrete. It's not your problem once you sign. It's my problem if people get hurt, I said. Elias stepped closer. Think about your daughter, Reese. Being a single dad is expensive. Hattie, she's a sinking ship. Do you really want to tie yourself to her anchor? She'll go back to the city eventually. They always do. It was a precise strike. He targeted my insecurity. The fear that I was just a temporary stopover for Hattie, a rustic distraction before she returned to her real life. Get off my land, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the mountain. Take the check, Reese, Elias said, dropping it on the hood of my truck. Hattie doesn't have a future. Don't let her drag you down. He drove away. I stared at the check. The wind fluttered the edges. I picked it up. I walked inside. Hattie was laughing at something Maya said. They looked up as I entered. Hattie saw the look on my face. Her smile faded. Reese? I held up the check. Your brother was here. She went pale. What did he offer you? Enough, I said. Did you take it? The question surprised us both. I walked over to the wood stove. I opened the iron door. I tossed the check into the flames. We watched it curl, blacken, and turn to ash. I told you, I said, turning to her. Rocks don't lie, and neither do I. She let out a breath she'd been holding since she arrived. It was the sound of a woman realizing she finally had a shield mate. The town hall was packed. It was a small room, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee, filled with locals concerned about traffic and developers concerned about profit. Elias was at the front, presenting a glossy rendering of the summit at Foster Ridge. It looked beautiful. It looked expensive. This development will bring jobs, Elias was saying, His charisma turned up to 11. It will bring tax revenue, and we have completed all necessary environmental surveys. I stood up. I was wearing my field clothes, clean flannel, vest, boots. I didn't dress up for them. I wanted them to see the workman, not the suit. Objection, I said. The room turned. Elias's smile tightened. Mr. Foster, the council chair said, you have the floor. I walked to the front. I didn't look at Elias. I looked at Hattie, sitting in the front row. She was pale, her hands clasped in her lap. She gave me a tiny nod. I placed my crate on the table. I took out the core sample, the one from the first day. I placed it next to the microphone. Thud. This is a sample of the substrate from the proposed building site, I said into the mic. My voice was calm, authoritative. It's expansive clay shale. When it gets wet, it swells. When it dries, it shrinks. If you build a foundation on this, it will heave. The road will buckle. The sewer lines will shear. Elias's lawyer, a man in a gray suit sitting in the front row, stood up instantly. Objection, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Foster's data was not submitted during the public discovery period. This is a surprise exhibit and is inadmissible under standard zoning procedure. The council chair looked hesitant. He has a point, Mr. Foster. Public safety supersedes discovery protocols under County Code 14.2. I shot back, quoting the regulation I'd memorized the night before. Any evidence of imminent landslide risk or soil liquefaction must be heard regardless of filing deadlines. Unless you want to go on record denying a safety briefing? The lawyer sat down, silenced. The chair waved me to continue. I pulled out the transparency maps. And this is the overlay of the 1998 survey versus the 2024 proposal. The Ramirez Group is claiming land that belongs to the watershed to inflate their acreage count. This is ridiculous, Elias interrupted, sweating now. We have certified reports. From who? I asked, cutting him off. From a firm owned by your shell company? I turned to the room. I'm a certified geological engineer. License number 4922. I stake my professional reputation on this data. You can build here, but 20 years from now, those houses will be sliding into the ravine, and the town will be liable. The room went quiet, the dominance moment. I wasn't yelling, I was just right. Elias stood up. Hattie, he barked. Tell them, you're the project lead. Tell them he's lying. This was it, the loyalty gate. Hattie stood up. She walked to the microphone. She looked at her brother, then at the council, and finally at me. He's not lying, she said. Her voice was clear, stronger than I'd ever heard it. The land is unstable. My family knew it in 2005. They hid the report. I have the original copies here. She pulled the yellow documents from her bag. Hattie, Elias hissed. You're fired. You're disowned. You realize that? I resign, she said, looking him in the eye. And you can keep the name. I'm paying my own way from now on. She placed the documents on the table next to my rock. I advised the council to deny the zoning permit. The gavel banged. Chaos erupted. But in the center of it, Hattie and I stood together, an island of calm in the noise. Beat 9, falling action. The fallout was messy, but manageable. The permit was denied. The Ramirez stock took a hit. Elias was under investigation. Hattie lost her apartment in the city, her company car, and her salary. We were sitting on the porch of the cabin. It was Christmas Eve. The snow was falling in thick, silent flakes. So, she said, wrapping her hands around a mug of cocoa, I'm officially unemployed and homeless. You're not homeless, I said. I was sanding a piece of wood, a toy I was making for Maya. The rhythmic shh sound was soothing. I can't stay here forever, Reese. I need to find a job, maybe in Denver. There's a geological consulting firm in Boulder looking for a project manager, I said, not looking up from the wood. I sent them your resume yesterday. She froze. You did what? You have a degree in business logistics. You know how to handle permits. You know how to stand up to bullies. They'd be lucky to have you. Reese. And, I continued, blowing the sawdust off the wood. Boulder is a 40-minute drive. Commutable. She set the mug down. She turned to me. Are you asking me to stay? I put the sanding block down. I looked at her. The void inside me was gone, filled with the presence of this stubborn, brilliant, resilient woman. I'm telling you that the data supports a partnership, I said. And Maya asked if you're going to be here for Christmas morning. I'd hate to disappoint her. Is that the only reason? I stood up. I stepped into her space protective, close but respectful. I resisted the urge to kiss her, letting the tension sit there, warm and promising. I kept a seat open for you, I said softly. At the table. For good. She smiled. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Then I accept the position. Beat 10. Resolution. Christmas morning was bright and cold. We were at the local diner, our first public outing as a unit. Maya was showing the waitress her new wooden horse. Hattie was sitting next to me in the booth. The diner door opened. It was the town mayor, a guy who had been skeptical of me for years. He walked by our table, paused, and nodded at Hattie. "Miss Ramirez," he said respectfully. "Good work at the hearing. We appreciate honesty in this town." "Thank you, Mayor," she said, beaming. She reached out and took my hand on top of the table. She didn't hide it. She interlaced our fingers, claiming me in front of the whole town. "Ready to go?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, squeezing her hand. "Let's go home." Maya ran ahead to the truck, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. Hattie's fingers tightened around mine, grounding me. I didn't check the horizon for fault lines. I just followed them home,